Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, Rick, how are you doing today?
Good, Mark. Nice to be here.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Grow Fast podcast. Normally on our podcast, we talk to sales trainers and sales consultants, and you have spent your whole career, on the front line selling and leading sales teams inside of large organizations. I listened to your podcast on your episode on the Sales Game Changers podcast with Fred Diamond. Really enjoyed it. I mean, there are a lot of people who sell, but there's kind of a smaller subset of that of people who really give a lot of thought to, the methodology, the processes, and the value they bring to the table. And I took a lot of that away from that episode. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
What I want to talk to you about is, what it's like to sell in large organizations, and then selling individually, and then also as part of a team. I think a lot of your sales has been in the government sector, and also want to talk to you a little bit about that. But before we jump into all that, maybe you could just give us a kind of a high level overview of your background.
Yeah. So I started in the tech industry in the early 90s. I was fortunate enough to do an internship at Intel in 1989. I was at Northeastern University as part of a co-op program. And part of that is that you have one foot in industry and you have one foot in academia. And I was fortunate enough to be Intel's first intern from Northeastern University. And when I left university, I was hired by Intel, and I started in high performance computing with Intel. And that journey lasted 32 years.
Wow.
I retired from Intel and went over to Microsoft as the vice president for global education for a couple of years, and most recently returned to Intel. I have a very, very deep love for Intel, and it's for its mission and for its contribution to the world. And so I'm very happy to be now back in Intel leading our global SI efforts.
That's an amazing journey. And I mean, you were there when Intel, I would still say it's at the very, very top, but back in the Andy Grove days when, it was considered to be one of the best run companies in the world. And there's a lot of legacy kind of management, learnings from that. I think the whole OKRs originated from Intel, and there's, that's had kind of a ripple carry-on effect to so many different companies around the world as well.
Yeah, and OKRs are still table stakes inside of Intel. So Andy Grove was an extraordinary leader, and we're fortunate now. Pat Gelsinger, who is our current CEO, was one of Andy's proteges, and so you see that Grovian culture coming back to Intel, and it's good, and that culture is really rooted in superb discipline, superb execution, superb operational excellence, but also having a really strong strategic vision and understanding of where industry is going and how we have to intercept where our customers are. And today, of course, that's all AI. The momentum and that we're seeing in AI, it's fascinating. I was talking to my 12-year-old son, and we're constantly having discussions about technology and in industry. And I was saying that, in the internet era, we thought that, speed, that we were moving as fast as we possibly could. And that speed was, the most important factor. And that level of speed is just accelerated with AI and it's disrupting everything. And so how do you navigate that strategically?
And you bringing up some interesting points that I hadn't, kind of penciled in here, but let's go with that. From where you sit, what are the products or services, AI related that you are going to market with, and you're seeing that hockey stick kind of uptake?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm spending a lot of time as a sales leader and leader in the company just understanding. So I'm reading a lot, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's things coming out of Stanford on the direction of AI, or whether it's studying what enterprises, and in particular the Global 500 and Fortune 2000 are doing. It's fascinating to me that if we look at the data right now, that 80% of all AI projects are failing.
Yeah.
But right, which is an astounding, but it does tell you the level of innovation that is happening in this space. That people see that IT leaders and C-suite leaders see the promise of AI, and they're willing to go out and experiment. And in many ways, they have to go experiment, right? Because everybody is moving in that direction. But also the things that we see in terms of the progression of natural language processing and things like ChatGPT or BERT or any of the other AI, Llama as an example, all of those models that are almost becoming conversational with us. And the promise of these technologies and what they can do in healthcare and scientific research and our experience as consumers. I mean, the promise, and I just think we're in the early stages of this. I mean, clearly AI had 4 decades, right, before Chat GPT kind of unleashed everybody's imagination about what was possible. But now it's just a fascinating area, and it's moving at an incredibly rapid pace.
Yeah.
We see the infrastructure build out that's happening around AI. We see the level of innovation, the level of new models that, every week there's new models that are coming out. It's very reminiscent of the enthusiasm that we saw, as the internet began to rise, right? And
I was just going to say there was that initial hype, and everybody said, like, well, what's our internet strategy? And many of them failed. But as you said, it unleashed so much innovation. And if we would have just cut things off right then and said, well, this internet thing's a failed experiment, I mean, we wouldn't. So many of the companies that are just, the largest, fastest growing companies in the world wouldn't even have appeared. But it's that innovation, you had to kind of struggle through. But yeah.
We were referring back to Andy Grove and to Andy Grove's leadership, and Andy used to have this one chart that is seared in my mind, and it's this idea of a software spiral, that the software spiral constantly creates new momentum for new opportunities, for new innovation. And that software spiral creates an insatiable demand for silicon. Right.
Right.
That was what it meant to us. Was this just
right? It's like, what's in it for me?
Insatiable demand for
this spiral's good.
No, that's right. This insatiable demand for compute and networking and storage, and what AI and what all these new models have brought to us now, in my opinion, is this idea of going back to Grove and going back to that software spiral is the creation of these new models and these new use cases around AI, right, have really created a new spiral that is now creating momentum around this insatiable appetite for all things compute, all things storage, all things networking. And that's really good for our industry. But in all of that is this incredible level of innovation that's happening around AI. And that's really exciting. When I think about, my 12 and 14-year-old and what will they, when they're entering college, when they enter their career, kind of what will things look like, right? Just tremendous optimism around, the services and capabilities and how this might change education, as an example, right?
Well, you mentioned healthcare, and I mean, if you think about the traditional method of just going to see your individual doctor, and you have, maybe 7 minutes with them, and and they're going to basically reflect on the information that they've pulled from your charts and then their personal experience. And if you plug that into the AI powered networked world, where instantaneously they can look at everybody with your similar profile and their health outcomes in that relevant universe, the decisions and the ability to match you up with the right treatments is going to be amazing. It's already moving in that direction.
Yeah, and you said one really important thing in healthcare and in other places, which is the human is not out of the loop,
Yeah,
right? These are tools that will augment, right, the
totally.
creativity and the intelligence and knowledge of a human, whether that's in, you know, an application of health or an application of education. If you think about education as an example, I spent 20 years in the field of education, and you think about all of the very low level things that teachers have to do and grading and those kind of things, right? The ability and the opportunity to automate many of those things, and enable teachers to really do the things that they do really well, which is that caring, that mentoring, right? That imparting of knowledge, and get away from maybe some of the more tactical things. That's an incredible promise and a future that I think we'll see develop over the next 10 years.
Awesome. Well, let's go back to when you first started in sales, and let's talk about the changes throughout the years, both with like the tools and because I mean we were talking about AI, and there are a lot of AI tools for sales executives. But when you first started, what was it like? Was there a training program? Say, okay, you're a salesperson, and this is what we expect, or did they say, here's your desk, go hit the phone and go hit it, or what?
Yeah, it's interesting for me personally. I was fortunate in the pathway that I traveled in my career, which is I was really started in sales excellence and sales operations,
Hmm.
and it was a role um, of supporting what was at that time field sales engineers that were selling the largest, most complex computers in the world, high performance computing, into national labs and DoD and things like NOAA and weather modeling. And at that point in time, I was able to learn the trade, right, the skills from very senior sales executives, because I was supporting their RFP responses, right? It was
Hmm.
back in the boiler room, like, with the tools, crafting these, 200-page responses for high performance computers. And, and so I was able to be mentored and learn from, those folks that had spent, decades, crafting, sales. And what was really great and what differentiated the really great sales executives from those that were maybe not as good was just their interpersonal skills.
Hmm.
We talk about selling today, more technical, but the one thing is those interpersonal skills that these sales executives had. They really, the ones that really excelled had these tremendous interpersonal communication skills. They were technical. They understood the markets. They understood the products really well. But what really differentiated them was that interpersonal skill set that they had.
So a couple things interesting. You started actually from the sales enablement, or I forget the exact word you use, but you're helping to, I would assume, kind of give them the information that they need, track activities, things like that, and then observe what these successful salespeople are doing. So that was actually a great way to learn, and that's probably, I would assume, atypical for a lot of organizations where people start in a sales role and they would start, as a sales development representative, and they're on the phone or, doing email sequences and so on. And then maybe move into one of those kind of support or operational roles. So I mean, that's kind of a flipped learning opportunity there. Very good. Um, you mentioned the interpersonal skills. Were these skills, did they use them obviously when they're talking with their customers and prospects? But did you find that they also had those same skills internally? Because some salespeople, they're just awesome in front of customers, but inside they're like what's the word, a bull in a china shop, because they're just so focused on getting the deal, right? And then, but I've worked with some that are amazing both inside out. They never lose their cool. They're always just great communicators. What was your experience?
Yeah, we definitely had a few proverbial bulls in the china shop. What's interesting, today we would, we put customer advocacy kind of at the top of everything, no matter what organization you're in, right?
Yeah.
We all are here to kind of serve our customers. But it's interesting. I heard a great quote. I think it was from Muhammad Ali. I was listening to a podcast recently, but he said that impossible is an opinion, not a fact,
Hmm.
which is great. And I think about some of those really legendary sales executives that we had because, at that time where we were moving into supercomputers and we were competing against Cray, there were a lot of people that would say, well, it's impossible for us to be successful at XYZ account. And those folks that had that growth mindset, that impossible was not part of their language, those were the ones that were really successful. And yeah, sometimes they were bulls in a china shop, but that's because they didn't believe in the word impossible. They only believed in what was possible. And I think you have to, if you're going to be successful in sales, right, you have to have that mindset of anything is possible. If you're creating value for your customer, if you really understand your customer, if you understand what the possibilities are, and even potentially what the unrealized possibilities are, right, that will make you a really superb account executive. And because those that maybe don't, they're like, oh, well, that's impossible. It's impossible for me to unseat my competition. It's impossible for me to get my customer to pay attention to what my offerings are today because they've got too many other things, right? The ones that have been extraordinarily successful in the career that I've worked in are in and that I've seen, as well as kind of my own thought process, is you always have to think about what the possibilities are versus what's impossible.
I think that's some great advice, and it kind of goes in parallel with believing in your product and believing in your company. And if you really have that deep seated belief, it makes it easier to go out and sell and find opportunities. And I think that kind of aligns with I think it was it Motorola that they were developing a competitive product that was going to be sort of an existential threat to Intel, and you guys had like an all hands on deck, and were able to reverse course. I think it was in a matter of like 8 weeks or something like that, which for an organization the size of Intel, dealing with the types of products that you guys, which the development pipeline is years and it's not months, but you guys were able to change course. And I remember that some of the initial feedback was, "There's no way we can get this done," and your leadership was like, "There's no impossible," right?
Yeah, I mean, and I look at what Intel, today, as Intel strives to build our foundry business. If you go back before, Pat's arrival, as an example, we weren't really thinking that way, and Pat is one of those leaders that inspires. Anything is possible, right? If you have the right strategy, right vision, if you can operationalize it, and if you can, most importantly, sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, he's a really extraordinary leader.
So you started off sales operations. When did you? Which again, I think is a great learning opportunity, and you were handling RFPs. So which means you are learning so many different aspects about the company because you're completing those documents, right?
Right.
Which is it's a great learning opportunity there. Um, when did you move into a actual frontline engaging with a prospect or customer role?
Yeah, I spent about 3 years kind of learning the trade from the inside. And today, if you think about individuals that are coming up, they're probably starting their career in inside sales, as an example, before moving to the inside. It's almost that apprenticeship or internship
Yeah.
where you really get to learn about value, customer orientation, how to probe with the right questions at the right time for your customers. And for me, it was about 3 years, doing that before I moved into a frontline field sales engineer position. And that transition when you realize all of a sudden you're responsible for everything that goes on at a customer. Some of these were, big customers. These are Wall Street
Yeah.
customers that are running mission critical, or they're defense customers, or they're, civilian agencies, and they're really relying on you and on your company to deliver. Right, it is part of their mission, whether that's a private sector mission or a public sector mission. And you feel the weight of that responsibility for those accounts and for everything that goes on when you're delivering those products and those types of mission critical solutions. But that was a good transition. The fact that I had all of that experience under me, to your point about when you have to sit down and you have to craft a full RFP, the depth and breadth of your understanding of the capabilities and the value that your company, brings to a customer becomes very, very deep. And it really helps you build your skills in terms of representing your company to ultimately to a customer.
Yeah, I was just over the last 2 years been working on helping a company restructure their RFP response processes, and as part of that, we hired an RFP manager who had project managed experience, but no experience with this particular company. And it was funny because literally 4 or 5 months in, she knew more about the company than pretty much anybody, because it's just all those, like you said, the depth and the breadth, and having to respond and verify. Of course, she's not crafting the responses; she's working with subject matter experts, but she's aggregating or putting all that information together and reviewing it. And it's just like, ask a question. If you don't know, ask Amy, she'll know. So it's good stuff. I worked with a Microsoft partner for about 5-6 years. And so, we did a lot of, joint selling, co-selling to Microsoft customers. And I gained a massive amount of respect and appreciation for the difference of working as an individual salesperson or as a sales leader in a smaller organization versus, an organization like Intel, Microsoft. Because Microsoft, if you're dealing with a Fortune 500 company, there is an account manager who runs the whole kind of strategy for the account. But then you have sales leaders for the different products or services, right? And you all have to work together to make sure that the overall strategy is being met. But individuals have their own quotas as well, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the dynamics of working in a large organization with that, where sometimes you might even have competing interests internally at your customers.
Yeah, sure. So maybe 2 points here. One around that orchestration, and maybe another around this idea of co-opetition, which is probably a good idea, right? But
Sure.
on the complexity of selling today, I think and I don't know that this applies to all industries, but it certainly applies in the IT industry today, that things have gotten very complicated for CIOs and for chief technology officers. They're dealing with AI, they're dealing with data, they're dealing with security issues, they're dealing with, compliance issues around data, where that data sits. So they're dealing with, the regulatory environment. It's become incredibly complicated and complex, and they need companies that can understand that complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And they need sales and account executives that understand that complexity. And I would say that no one individual can understand it all, which means that you have to be a phenomenal orchestrator, collaborator, and networker
Yep.
to bring the full suite of solutions. And this is one of the things that, from my time in Microsoft, that I think, Microsoft does exceptionally well. They're able to orchestrate a vast array of capabilities, competencies, technical acumen, and bring that to their customers to solve very, very complex problems with their product, with their product or offering. So that role of orchestration, where you were asking about early in my career. It's me with a briefcase, kind of traveling around from account to account as more of an individual solo contributor out there. And there was always factory resources kind of that you could reach back to. But if I compare where we were as that sole field sales engineer by themselves on an island the 1990s and early 2000s versus today, you're orchestrating if you're leading an account team, you're an orchestrator of many resources and many capabilities. And that's because the IT enterprises have become so complicated. Built within that is going to be this idea that there are going to be friction points that you have to navigate around. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We see that in our industry, you could have a competitor one day and you could be partnering with them the next day on open source issues, right? Because you want to see overall the growth. But when those friction points potentially come up, even within a company, the first principle is do right by your customer, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the problem ultimately that you're trying to solve? And this is what I saw from the really fantastic leaders at Microsoft and the account executives from Microsoft. This is what I see from the really fantastic teams at Intel that handle these multi-$100 billion customers that we have. You're always going to have some friction points, but it's very simply what is the right thing to do by your customer, and that untangles friction points pretty quickly.
That a great advice as well, because a lot of organizations will have an agenda and they say, well, we want to prioritize the sales of service A or product A, and they'll put pressure and or provide incentives to the sales team to go out and sell that, which is kind of the opposite of what you're talking about. You're talking about, the person who's orchestrating that account and everybody else who's involved has to have a deep understanding of what is the customer trying to achieve here, what are their challenges, and let's help them. And by helping them, we'll deepen that relationship and help ourselves. But I think that's great. Put the customer first.
It's just to kind of pull on that thread. The reason that we see those kind of things is because you have these very complex enterprises that have different business units.
Right.
For within Intel, we have a data center unit, a client unit, a networking unit. Same thing in Microsoft. Different business units, different priorities, and part of the art of being an account executive is how do you navigate all of those priorities. There's a term that's often used that salespeople are coin operated. They do what their commission plan tells them first.
Oh, okay.
Quite frankly, I have disliked that terminology for a long time because I find that sales professionals, and I use the word professionals, are not coin operated. In fact, sales professionals are trying to do the best thing for their customers. They're not always just trying to maximize their pay. Right. And the truly great ones, put their customer interests first. And then on the backside of that, if we have the wrong incentive mechanics on the back end of that, then go fix the problem within your company. Don't lead your customer down a pathway, the wrong pathway, because the incentive plan is wrong. So the best sales professionals I have really lead with how am I creating value for my customer first and foremost.
Well, and it's also, it's also rewarding when you help a customer solve a problem, and then you see the successful deployment of that solution, and that deepens your relationship. And if you do a good job with them, because if you're playing the short-term game and you're going to get that commission and then you're done, well, good luck, man. I mean, because a person like you has been in an organization for 31 years. I'm sure you have a lot of repeat customers that you've been going back to for years and years and years, and you have to do what's right by them. But also, if you think about, I mean, my oldest son, he's in a sales role with AWS,
Yep.
and way before he moved into that role, he did an internship, and then but he'd done some sales before, and we'd always have this conversation about the benefits, pros and cons of being a sales role. And I say, like, look, basically, salespeople, you have a great deal of autonomy. You have typically a higher ceiling on your earnings. Sometimes it's uncapped, okay, but there is pressure that comes with it, right? But when you close a deal and you help a customer solve a problem, that's something that it feels good, right? And so I think if you really enjoy sales, part of the enjoyment comes from solving problems, which means doing the right thing. Um, when when you're part of a team like that, um, I feel like sometimes my job is not even selling; it's just getting the right people in front of the customer.
Yep.
Even though I'm the one that's kind of driving the account, but it's like I just need to figure out what their issues are, and then get the right subject matter expert in front of them. Is that part of what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, today, I know enough about AI to be a little bit dangerous, right? And,
Yeah,
and a lot of that is, through self learning. But at the end of the day, the job now is to get our data scientists and our data engineers in front of customers, talking about the real problems that they're facing. And you can learn those things as an account manager, as a sales engineer. I think everybody should be studying very hard right now. What are the AI models? Where are these things going? What are the use cases to help their customers? But at the end of the day, a data scientist pretty much wants to talk to a data scientist. Uh, and part of the responsibility from an orchestration perspective is, how do I have data scientists talking to data scientists, but also other parts of the C-suite, right? How do I have my controller talking to somebody else's controller? The way that finance folks look at this, and so that role of orchestration, you have to bring yourself up to a level where you are fluent and conversational in the topics and really, really good at them. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a point where you kind of reach the limits of your own knowledge. And at that point, how do you orchestrate bringing in subject matter experts, right, to continue to forward the sales cycle and to really deepen the relationship? Because these relationships are really important.
totally agree. And I've had subject matter experts who've made me just look, really smart. There are a couple people in my career that have won so much business for us. And I just love setting up a meeting with these people, because I know, I mean, 90% chance of close once they're in there, because they're solving their problems. At the same time, sometimes when you bring in a subject matter expert, it can be, what's the word? There's a little bit of an unknown factor there if you haven't worked with them in the past. And have you ever been in a situation where you brought somebody in and maybe they overstep their bounds in terms of, they're a subject matter expert on this specific piece of technology, but they start talking about the business or the deal, and you have to kind of rein things in a bit? Or have you ever experienced something like that?
Yeah, I think this gets back the way, if you're a very skilled account executive, it's how do you coach somebody beforehand. Now, I've had situations where I have coached people beforehand, and I said, "Don't do this," and what's the first thing they do? They walk in and
Yes.
they do that exact same. They do that thing, right? And and you end up having to pull your customer, who hopefully you have a really great relationship with, pull your customer aside and say, I apologize for that, right?
Yeah.
But that's where your relationship is critical, right? So
Yeah.
to your point, sometimes you'll bring these subject matter experts in and they will do extraordinary things to move the sales cycle forward for you, and deepen that relationship. And occasionally, very rare, will you get a bit of we'll use the term a loose cannon, right? That maybe will do exactly what you've asked them not to do. And yeah, we've probably all had that situation, or probably all had that experience. But that's where the depth of your own personal relationship really,
Totally.
really matters. And if you have a really deep relationship with an account, and you have an intimate relationship, deep understanding of their business, I think they'll give you some grace, uh, you know, on something like that, as long as it's infrequent. Like if it,
Yeah.
time and again, then you're just the wrong person handling that account. But I think the most important thing is, if you do a really good job as an account executive in coaching people before you bring them into your accounts, what are the issues? What value are you trying to create? Where should you be spending the majority of your time? And what are their hot button issues, right? So that you don't necessarily go in and end up, inadvertently, right, hitting a sensitive spot for them, right?
Yeah.
As an example, competition tends to be a sensitive spot. If you're thinking about dealing with one global SI versus another global SI, don't come in and talk. Don't come in and say, "Hey, I was just at such and such."
Right.
And so just being sensitive to the politics, the culture, the hot button issues, as an account executive, as a master orchestrator, because I like to
Mhm.
think of account executives today, especially when we're talking about these large enterprises, they are really master orchestrators. And that is core to their skill set. Be a master orchestrator in terms of how you're coaching those people before you bring them into your accounts.
I think it's some great advice. And I mean, that is part of my process. I've also had situations like you just said, where you said, "Hey, I just do not mention this." I had things were going really well, and I mean, it's just seared in my memory, because the guy, the deal was going, and I was like, yeah, and then he goes, "Oh, by the way, have you guys heard of?" And I was like, "No, he's going to say it. He's going to say it," and he said it. And I was like, but we were able to recover. Actually, I had one subject matter expert that he'd taken a sales course. I didn't know, and so he, towards the end of his his bit, he would ask like a discovery question, right? And the question he would ask would be like, "Oh yeah, I got to ask. So are you the decision maker?" And I was like, so we had to have a conversation about that. And he goes, "But my course told me." And I was like, "Yeah, but so, it's great, but I got that part." When if somebody was joining your organization right now in a junior level, what are some tips you would give them in terms of, one, developing that relationship with key accounts, and then just general advice in terms of how to be successful? They're coming into a junior sales role. It's year one for them at Intel or any other large tech organization. What should they do to be successful?
Yeah, I think number one, find good mentors. I had great mentors that I learned from. When you ask somebody to mentor you, 9 out of 10 times, I think people will say yes, especially people that have been around. Most people are very gracious and kind with their time and energy. So I think mentoring is one. Um, I read a lot. I still read a lot. I've read a lot throughout my career. I have a stack of AI books right now that I'm, plowing my way through to learn everything I can about, use cases around AI, and, how enterprise IT should be thinking about everything from data processing to deployment. So I tend to, it's just a personal thing. I tend to read a lot. but I also tend to listen to podcasts.
Hmm.
Right. So you think about Fred Diamond and IES, and you think about these things. One of the areas in that I'm learning from AI, I listen to Lex Fridman a lot.
Yep.
He has some great podcasts. So, it used to be if I was going out to exercise, I'd have an ACDC or something on, going for a run, and
You're dating yourself.
that's right. As I've gotten a little bit older, I'm listening to really thoughtful people and podcasts. And I think what all of that tells you, whether it's your mentoring, reading, listening to podcasts, is seek advice from others,
Hmm.
right? And most folks will be incredibly gracious with their time and with their advice and with their and with their experience. So that's maybe one thing. The second thing is learn the culture of the company that you're in. Really invest in learning. We were talking about the RFP experience, right? And how much I learned about the company from that experience. But I think really learning the full capabilities of your company, because you're not just selling an offering or a solution. At the end of the day, you're really selling your company.
Hmm.
And so, really understanding that full capability of the company. You look at why big companies, I think, are getting bigger and stronger. It's because they have the broadest portfolio of capabilities to deal with a high degree of complexity that we're operating in today. But as a young salesperson, taking your first sales role, I think understanding that it's not just that you need to be a expert in your offering or your solutions. You also have to be a deep subject matter expert in your company,
Hmm.
because in many cases, if a company is buying from you, maybe they're not betting. In some cases, they're betting their company on you, but they're certainly betting an organization, or they're making a substantial investment in not just your product, but in your company and you as a sales professional, believing, right? You use the Ted Lasso, right? Believing, right, that you can help them to achieve what they're ultimately trying to achieve.
I think that's some great advice. And the mentors. Sometimes people are afraid to reach out, but like you said, most people are very happy to help. And the reading, I feel like it's a lost art. I read a lot, and these days I'm doing a lot of audiobooks while I'm walking.
Yep.
The only time I do music is if I get tired in the car and I put some music on to kind of wake me up on a longer road trip or something like that. I say once in a while, I need something to kind of pick me up, but there's just so much out there. And I'm going to come back at the very end and ask you for a couple of book recommendations. Okay. But I tell everybody, read. It's like there's in fact, a great book, and I wasn't expecting it to be that great, was Tim Ferriss's Tools of the Titans.
Yep.
Because what he does is he interviews all these super, super successful people across so many different domains and just gets their advice. And I'm like, oh my God, there's gold in almost every interview in that book. And I took, I don't know, maybe like 20 pages of notes, because when I'm listening, I will say, hey, Siri, take a note. And I got to keep stopping. And then I go back and I rewrite my notes from my phone. But point is there's just so much out there. So I totally agree with you. And then the podcast, that's a whole new, I mean, we just didn't even have these when we were growing up, right? And you have so many of these people like Lex Friedman who do the deep, what they call it, long format interviews.
He does these 3 hour long format interviews, which I think are fascinating. I mean, if you want to know, where AI is going today, go listen to the 3 hour interview with Sam Altman, or go listen to this past week. I was listening to the person responsible at Meta for the Llama 2 foundation, right? And,
cool.
and those folks are really sharing the trajectory that we're on and these kind of things. So the information is definitely out there, right? It's just finding, the things that, you find that are interesting. I just happen to be an incredibly intellectually curious person, right? And you just can't, I think, put enough weight on being curious about these things, especially if you're in a account executive role where others are struggling with things. You part of your job is to bring new knowledge to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to kind of touch on that podcast thing again, I mean, it's amazing because, like, with the traditional media that we grew up with, somebody like Sam Altman might get a 30-second soundbite or a 1-minute soundbite on the evening news, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe 7 minutes on a talk show or something like that. But a 3-hour conversation with somebody who's intellectually, at the same caliber or level with them, that can kind of spar with them back and forth is amazing. So just a couple more questions here. You started off this conversation. We started off talking about AI and, in all the different use cases that we were just starting to see, but it's obviously going to increase massively. One of the use cases in our profession is, with sales enablement, prospecting. Are you using any tools, or are you following any tools that you think are big productivity boosts?
Yeah, it's interesting whether or not we think of these things as productivity boosts or in some cases productivity obstacles, right? So today's CRM systems, I think what we'll see is much more automation in the sales process. If you look at the level of sophistication of somebody like Microsoft, right? Microsoft has, hundreds of thousands of customers. Somebody like Intel, realistically, we have, millions of people that use our products. But at the end of the day, we have, big customers like Adele or
Sure.
so kind of very different sales engines and sales tools. But at the heart of most of that is CRM tools. And I think we'll see and are seeing more automation of that sales prospecting, that sales pipeline, right? The prospecting side, the lead management. It'll be really interesting to see how chatbots, as an example, which is really transforming customer service, how that might be transforming sales, where you have things like Copilot that, are their assistants in your sales effort, remind you when a customer is due for a refresh, when you're thinking about retention of your customers, when you're thinking about, the time between your contacts with your customers, right? You begin to have a personalized profile of your customer. How do they like to be talked to? When do they like to be talked to? All of that information, I think, increasingly automated through AI as we move forward. But at the heart of everything today is basically that CRM system that we all use.
Yeah, and I think that a great majority of salespeople kind of have a love-hate relationship with whatever CRM tool they're using.
Right.
And a lot of that comes down to the company's policies in terms of what they require and how you use it, so on. And if we can automate it and make it easier, because really, you want your salespeople out meeting prospects, meeting customers, orchestrating these kind of engagements, and not behind a desk, entering data. But it's interesting because you mentioned Copilot. And there are, applications of Copilot where you could be in a meeting, a Teams meeting, and it's listening and it's giving you notes based upon the topic. So, you might touch on, the last time we met, and it would pull up the meeting notes from the last time you met, as a simple example. But there are other applications like Gong AI that listen into the meeting and then create summaries and pointers and actually score the meeting. And I'm wondering how you feel about that, because it could be helpful, but it could also be perceived as a bit intrusive.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think, like many technologies, when they're new, there's always there's always a group that embraces it fully. There's a group that is kind of on the fence, and there's a group that resists these. I remember the first time that we started recording all meetings, and I'm like, this can't be good. you know everything that you're doing is being recorded, and does that temper, right, maybe how open you will be, or will it change your behavior in a particular way? And those were kind of all the reasons why, and you still have meetings where, like, we're not going to record this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, so I think there's use cases, like the use case you just gave is probably a pretty good one. Right. But there's also this balance between, there's times when, you want to have a more candid, direct conversation that you actually don't want recorded. And
Right.
the nice thing is that the tools are there to do both. If you don't use the tool, don't use the tool. But if you want to use the tool in a really positive and constructive way, then it's a great tool, right? Yeah. I know when I go in with, and I work with consultants in particular, they always ask when we go into a big strategy meeting, they're like, can we record this so that we can come back to it and make sure that we didn't miss any points? And that's really valuable, right?
Yeah.
Really valuable to have that artifact that you can go back to. But the times when you're like, hey, I just don't want this recorded, maybe for privacy reasons, or maybe you want to be a little bit salty because you're trying to get something done, and you feel like folks need a good a good strong message, and you're like, hey, we're just not going to record this. There's a time and place for all of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Hey, earlier you talked about the interpersonal skills of some of those salespeople you worked with back in the early days, and I'm wondering, how does that translate? Those skills, how do they translate into this world that now? I don't know about you, but it seems to be like that most meetings are done virtually, right? And I used to coach my team when I was leading teams in various markets, but get the meeting, always get the meeting, because until you've met the person face to face, you're nobody. You're just you're just a name, right? So got to get that meeting, and then that the first greeting, building rapport, asking questions, and having that connection there. Do those same skills translate, or are there any ways to kind of adapt it to this virtual world that we're living in?
Yeah, I think my answer is it depends, right? It depends on, in large part, like any interpersonal relationship, like, how much time do you have? How are you going to use that meeting? Are you going to spend some time getting to know people at a personal level? Do they want to, do they want to go there, as an example?
Right.
Probably we've had this enormous kind of productivity boost in the fact that we can use collaboration platforms and video extensively. But there's just no replacement. I know, like, I'm ramping into a new role, and it's really important for me to meet with those customers in person for the first time. Once you have that relationship, we always have a saying that at Microsoft that, relationships always, the job may go away, but relationships endure. Right.
Totally agree.
And
yeah.
So to build those enduring relationships, I think does take some face time. But boy, what a productivity booster, these collaborations like Teams and Zooms and all of these platforms have created, and what an opportunity for us to change the way we work. But I think it's, I think a lot of it is, the interpersonal skills is, being open about yourself, being open about your family, being open about the things that you care about, and that really build those relationships, in my opinion.
Great observations, and totally agree with you. Last couple things here. Do you have any personal productivity tips or advice or things that you follow in terms of just making yourself much more productive?
Um, I'm pretty disciplined with time management. And I think when you talk about productivity boosters, it's really to understand, how you navigate time pressures and time management. So like I tend to, I tend to read early in the morning and late at night, as an
Hmm.
example, right? The rest of the day kind of gets blocked out for time with my people, time with partners, operational things, and I structure around a pretty good what we used to call Microsoft rhythm of business. So you're figuring out what your rhythm is and what works for you. So for me, when I'm trying to learn new things, I want to do it in the morning. If I'm trying to learn something, I kind of want to shut off at 9 o'clock at night, and I want to watch the world news at 9:30, right? But I know in the morning that's when I should do my training, right? That's when I'm the most energetic. That's when I'm the most alert, and so I think time management from a productivity perspective is probably the most important thing to be thinking about.
Awesome.
I also use every device possible, right? I have three computers in my office. I got my cell phone with me, so I had essentially a fourth computer, and in anything that's valuable, I use the different AI platforms today in terms
Mhm.
of productivity boosters. It's interesting. You think of Llama and Chat GPT and these things. They can be if you're looking for information, right, and or you want perspectives on something. There are these tools now that are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think everybody needs to learn how to use those tools and make it part of their daily workflow. Just to practice every day, I get up and I ask one of these large language models, and I play on different ones. I ask, what happened in history today? It's an interesting question,
Awesome.
right?
Yeah.
And it'll give you 10 things that happened in history today. And it's just an interesting thing. One, you're on the tool, you're playing with it, you're kind of getting that interaction, you're seeing what it can do. But it's also a fun conversation starter, right?
Totally. Hey, did you know that 200 years ago?
did
But
you did you know did you know on this day such and such happened, right?
yeah,
And so finding neat little things like that make the day a little bit more fun, can be good productivity boosters.
that's awesome. What I like about that is you start the day by investing in yourself.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens throughout the rest of the day, you've already, you know what I mean? You've paid it forward to yourself already. So that's pretty cool. Hey, last question. First off, I really appreciate you taking time out, and we're coming up on an hour, and I want to help you with that time management. But I've been looking at these books behind you during the whole conversation here,
Yeah.
and clearly you read a lot. Can you make one book recommendation related to your work, whether that's AI related or sales related, and then something that's just not related to work that maybe you go back to from time to time for other values?
Yeah, I think I like Patrick Lencioni. Is a really thoughtful leader around organizations and motivating people. It's somebody that I've followed throughout my career. So I think anything from Patrick. I'm currently reading a series from the AI Academy. Her name is I Almeida, and she's written three really good books on AI, generative AI transformation. They're pretty detailed. It's probably a good 800 pages of reading across the three books. So you got to they're 6 by 8 inch books, so I can get through about 100 pages a day, and so it would take you probably a week of time. But when you think about AI and what's happening and what will happen over the next 10 years, spending 10 to 12 hours of time, investing in understanding, what's happening with, whether it's through her book or somebody else, I think is really valuable. And then the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. One of the books I come back to, quite frankly, and I keep on my desk. about how do we process information, and how do we think about problems, right? So I think Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow is another really good book.
Yeah, I've read that. I should go back to that, but I did enjoy it, and it's like just being aware of how our brain can solve problems in a different manner, and then just using that more. What's the word? Intentionally, I guess. But awesome. Well, hey, Rick, thank you so much again for being on the Grow Fast podcast. And if you're ever out in the Seattle, Bellevue area, let me know. And I hope to cross paths with you in person one day.
Super, Mark. Thanks. Yeah, come to Washington, D.C. We'll look forward to having a lunch.
Awesome.
Okay.
Take care. Cheers.